Well, welcome to another episode of Planet Possible. I'm delighted that you're joining us. Over the season, we're getting into the detail behind the really big issues that are critical to the way we manage our water and environment, speaking to leading figures and change makers from across the sector and around the world who are making a difference every day through their work. We've got a fantastic season sponsor to enable us to bring Planet Possible to you, and you'll hear a little more about them later. But for now, a huge thanks to Binny's for sponsoring Season 3. I'm Niki Roach, and alongside being a passionate advocate for all things water and environment, I'm a fellow of CIWEM. If you're new to the pod, CIWEM is the Chartered Institution of Water and Environmental Management, and our members in over 90 countries are professionals with a breadth and depth of expertise in the topics that are shaping the future of our planet. Across the season, we're getting into the detail of those topics, seeking out the evidence-led views and authentic opinions to help us better understand what's really possible for the planet. So let's get started. And in today's episode, we're really exploring what the future of the water and environment sector looks like, thinking about the types of skills we might need and how we ensure that the sector is inclusive and an inspiring place for people to work. And to help us unpick this topic, I'm joined by a fantastic co-host, a graduate flood risk consultant at Mott MacDonald and this year's CIWEM Young Environmentalist of the Year, Megan Barnes. Welcome, Megan. It's great to have you with us.
Hello, fantastic to be here.
And as you can probably hear, we're recording today's episode in person, which is wonderful. We're in our little audio zone at the Flood and Coast Conference happening in Telford, close to the Welsh borders. It's been an amazing few days with around 5,000 delegates coming through the doors, making connections and getting up to date with technologies, innovations and approaches to flooding and coastal management. And a little plug, if you want to get a flavour for the conference, have a listen to the daily podcast that we've made from this very studio. So, Megan and I are going to listen to our guest interview together and then we'll discuss our reflections. Our guest interview today is with the current president of CIWEM, Nicholas Howden. Nicholas is Professor of Water and Environmental Engineering at the University of Bristol, and he's also CIWEM's 35th president. It's great to hear Nicholas's reflections on what the future looks like for skills in the water and environment sector, and I was really interested to hear how integrated our approaches to digital skills are with our existing approaches to education.
We now have a generation of young graduates who have grown up since, for example, the iPhone was created. They've been in the presence of these sorts of technologies. They know how to use them. They use them completely differently from the way that I use them. There's something to do with the familiarity with it and the ability to evolve with the technology and rise with the challenge.
So, Megan, before we head to our guest interview, I'd love to hear your thoughts on why you chose to work in the water and environment sector.
My journey into becoming a member of the water and environment sector probably started when I was about 12, 13 years old. It was a geography lesson and we were looking at the impact of a make-believe volcanic eruption on a community and thinking then about what the impacts of that would be and thinking about the risks and thinking about the social impacts and the environmental impacts and the economic impacts and thinking about how the environment links in with the communities that live around it. And I remember finding it so fascinating, these different topics, and thinking this is something that I want to work in, this is something I want to be involved in, this is an environment and a space for learning about our world that really interested me. And then linking that in with a real passion for the outdoors and for the environment. I'm somebody who's always loved to be outdoors, going hiking, being in the Lake District, being in the Yorkshire Dales near Leeds where I live now, and how those intersect, so bringing water and being around nature and rivers, which I love, in with those ideas around the social impacts.
Let's jump into the interview with Nicholas and hear his reflections. Hi Nicholas, welcome to Planet Possible.
Hello Nikki, thank you for having me.
So as this year's CIWEM president, you've chosen quite an interesting theme. Tell us a little bit about why that is and what the theme is.
When I was first asked if I would be the next president following you, I felt that there was some scope to think about the future, trying to find a way to piece lots of different threads together. You talked about how everything was interlinked. We thought about the climate and biodiversity crisis, and we're going to have to put all of these things together somehow. We're going to have professionals who are continuously updating their skills, continuously finding new and exciting ways to do things, embracing new technologies. And so I thought, together with Matthew, our new junior president, that we should think about a theme that really looked out far into the future to challenge ourselves, to consider how all of those changes might be taking place. And that's how we came up with the theme of sort of CIWEM to 2050 and beyond, and how that would affect professional development for all of our members.
So you and I think we term ourselves mid-career professionals. Is that about right? I'm grouping
I would think so.
Somewhere like that. We can certainly look back 20 years with a degree of confidence, can't we, I guess? And if we did that, For you in particular, what stood out? What are some of the changes you've seen in the water and environment sector from a professional perspective, from a skills perspective?
When I look back to what I was sort of taught in university, computers were starting to be useful. Lots of the old drawing boards were being put away and CAD was starting to be something that was widespread. But when I did my summer internships, I still worked in a drawing office. And it was great to get to learn how to do that and to see how to do that. But once the computing power became available, you could see that all of this was going to change. And that was the transition that was happening then. And it's happened at a pace ever since. There are a number of things that have changed significantly. The pace at which we're expected to work, the skills that we are now expected to have. There's an awful lot more of writing your own reports, drafting your own documents, being a lot more tech savvy, and also being instantaneously available. Like with all these things, there are great benefits, but they also present quite a lot of challenge, particularly for the professional who now has to juggle a lot more than perhaps they used to.
And so I suppose with that in mind, there's already some juggling going on. And if we think about the kind of wider context of a climate and ecological emergency that we find ourselves in, I would say the focus on our sector feels greater now than it's certainly been at any time since I joined the profession. What do you think the next 20 years look like? What does the future look like? What skills do you think we need? And I'm asking that particularly because you're somebody who's an educator. You're right in the throes of all of this.
I think one of the things that I've found most fascinating about working in the university is that you get to see things that are maybe 5 or 6 years ahead of their time. So, for example, 5G has just launched, but 5G was in development in our labs possibly 8 or 9 years ago. And our colleagues are already talking about 6G and how that's going to be realised and what that will look like. I suppose the question that I always ask myself when I see them is I wonder how that's going to be implemented. I wonder how we could use that. I wonder what we could do with that. What's it for? Why would we need it? Because to a certain extent, when you first see it, it does look a little bit like magic. And then you start to think, well, what would we do with this? I mean, one of my colleagues, for example, in aerospace engineering, develops drones. And he just loves creating things that fly in new and exciting ways. But then when we sit down to chat about it, he'll show me the new test bed of a drone that, for example, can fly in underground mines, unmanned. So we don't need people to do confined spaces training anymore. The drone doesn't mind if there are some noxious gases in there. It will measure them and tell us what's there. It can be designed to carry a payload, so it can do some monitoring. It can stream the data back to us. It can create 3D images of the caverns that it's gone into and give us all sorts of information. I think when you start to look at all of these developments, you start to realise, my goodness, we're going to have a completely different set of skills to figure out what we want this item to do. Secondly, what do we then do with all of the information that it gives us? How do we organise all of that? How do we interpret it? How do we communicate that to other people? And how do we manage to do this in a way that's cost effective and that provides us with some real value? The thing that's becoming more apparent, I think, to us, particularly in engineering and the university, is the range of different disciplines and expertise that you need in order to operate any of these scenarios, from building the device to dealing with what it creates, to interpreting it and managing it, running it, and then providing some information from it. This could be satellites, it could be nanotechnology devices, it could be autonomous vehicles that we can use, tiny strain gauges into structures, remote monitoring devices. I would call myself a data scientist in some respect. And when we get all this information, you then look at it and think, well, what do we do with this? We can see things that we've never seen before.
You talked about there being a really wide range of skills that are needed. How well set up is our current education system to being ready for those kind of skills?
I think that's a really good question. It's a really interesting question. I think that we've always been quite good at integrating the things that are needed. Certainly in the university, we're looking at ways of integrating this into our programmes because you have to. I think where the real challenge lies is that we now have a generation of young graduates who have grown up since, for example, the iPhone was created. So for all of their teenage life and their largely secondary education, they've been in the presence of these sorts of technologies. They know how to use them. They use them completely differently from the way that I use them. There's something to do with the familiarity with it and the ability to evolve with the technology and rise with the challenge. I think the great challenge is going to be for individuals who have not grown up with that.
Our season sponsors for Planet Possible are Binnies, who recognise the opportunity that bringing together a breadth of professions creates to be truly amazing. Their engineers, scientists, constructors and environmental professionals collaborate to drive innovation, and Binnies, like Simon, believe that podcasts are a fantastic way to showcase some of the role models, global best practice and innovation that we have across the water and environment sector. We're grateful to Binnies for their support as it enables us to bring Planet Possible to you this season. That takes me, I think, on to the next thing I wanted to ask you, which is what you think the role of professional institutions in general, and obviously SIOM is one of those. What's the role for those kind of institutions in the future, given what we've just talked about?
One of the most important roles of the professional institution is to connect people together, connect those individuals to each other, connect them to information, to training, but also to connect them to other individuals at maybe their own career stage, maybe a different career stage, in either direction, more senior in years or more junior in years, and also across disciplines to ensure that our professionals are as rounded as possible. That's not to say that I don't believe in expertise, I absolutely do. But you need to know what your expertise are, and you also need to know where the boundaries are. The sorts of issues that we're dealing with, the answer of "I don't know" is entirely acceptable, and therefore seeking out those other people and knowing who to ask is really important. Given the sorts of challenges that we're looking at in the future, providing the means for professionals to do that is one of the key roles of our professional organisations.
So how well are we doing that at the moment, and what do we need to do differently in the future, do you think?
I think the frameworks that we've had in place for many years do a really good job of making sure that individuals who want to work in our industry have access to appropriate training, and that there are competencies that they need to reach in order to achieve a professional status. I think that's a gold standard, always has been, and I think always will be, and we're subtly changing that as time goes by to take into account new developments and so on, and I think sometimes place different emphases on the underlying why and how of what we do, as well as the what. So the introduction of more emphasis on, say, sustainable engineering is important. The thing that becomes challenging, and it comes back to this idea of the interconnections, what you see with social media developments, for example, is new companies able to think up entire new ways of connecting people. So if you look at the likes of Facebook or Twitter, LinkedIn, I would see it as a bit of disruptive influence to allow more direct connection between individuals. And I think it's very easy for a large-scale corporation to do that. I think it's perhaps a bit more challenging for some of our professional institutions to be able to immediately pivot to that sort of system. There's something to do with that interconnection and the potential for other disruptive technologies and techniques to influence what we do. So I think perhaps we've got a lot to learn from those more direct systems.
So what do we do really well at the moment? What do you think that we should be sort of doubling down on, regardless of what the future looks like? What's fit for purpose, do you think?
SIOM has a long history of being the leading organisation for the water environment industry. And I think that we've done very, very well at bringing the community together. I think there's some excellent mentoring goes on. The pandemic has demonstrated to us that there's a great deal of opportunity in online learning. I think the thing that I think we do particularly well is that the training materials and the webinar materials that have been produced by SciWem are really powerful, and they're really excellent. And having them in a form where individuals can sort of dip in and out when it's convenient for them is really great. So not needing to be present at a particular time in a particular place.
I've always thought about that a bit like going to a gig. I mean, it might be similar, it might not, depending on your branch. But, if you're there on the night, then you hear it. And if you're not, then you just hear how great or not it was. And we kind of need a bit more of a Spotify model, which is it's available whenever you want, wherever you are in the world. And because that actually, at the strength of our offering is the brilliance of our members, isn't it, really? And how do we share those globally? And I think you're absolutely right. I'm going to put you on the spot with one final question, if I may, really. Okay. So you are the chair of the Professional Standards Committee, as well as being the current president of SciWem. Some of our listeners will be people who are thinking about applying for membership, transferring to fellowship, joining us as fellows, which is brilliant. What's the one piece of advice you would give to those individuals before they hit send on their application form?
Wow, that is quite a challenge.
I did warn you. I did say I'm going to put you on the spot. But, it's a big job, and it's important, isn't it, for people?
Well, yes, it is important. The piece of advice that I would give somebody is probably a piece of advice that was given to me. Before you submit it, go back and reread it and make sure that you mean it. I suppose that has something to do with authenticity. The most important thing is that it really represents what you think. Because in all levels of what we do in the organisation, you will need to talk to it at some point. And therefore it's important that you can, and that you can explain what you said. I suppose on the one hand, that's a piece of advice because I'd like people to be successful. On the other hand, I also say that because I was once in a situation where I'd hit send, like you said, actually, and then I was asked about it, and I didn't know. I said, no, I don't know about this particular thing, because I'd made some suggestions about something, and the person who was talking to me was really disappointed, and they said, oh, well, are you going to be working on that shortly? Because it was an academic piece, and I said, yeah, and they said, oh, well, I was really looking forward to hearing what you might have had to say about that. And I think quite often when I'm interviewing people, I'm just really interested to hear what they have to say. I want to know, because there's always something that somebody else knows that I don't. That's the part of it that's really rewarding and fascinating.
You've summarised lifelong learning in a beautiful example there, haven't you, really? I think that's absolutely the point. Make sure you mean it. It's been lovely to hear your thoughts. Thank you so much for joining us on Planet Possible.
It's been a great pleasure. Thank you for having me.
OK, so, Megan, what are your initial reflections on what you've heard from Nicholas?
What really struck me was thinking about technology to begin with. And Nicholas talks about how we are in an age where people have grown up with smartphones in particular. And I can say that I am one of those early career professionals that Nicholas references who have grown up with that kind of technology. And we expect a certain level of technological efficiency and innovation. And I think that puts us as early career professionals in a really great position to be able to work with the technology of the future, to solve the problems and tackle and try to figure out the problems and solutions for issues in the environment that we are facing now and are going to face in the future.
And I guess building on that, how do we really inspire people to join our sector? You talked really beautifully about that moment when you felt like this is a place for me to be, but how do we make water and environment aspirational, somewhere that people choose to want to work in?
I think that's really interesting, and I think it comes back to a point that we were discussing earlier at the conference today about how people learn in different ways and people access education and the curriculum in different ways, and we need to value that and we need to make that really exciting. And what we really need to see is getting people outdoors into the environment and making concepts that might seem quite abstract, making those a reality and learning about the environment that sits around us and the communities we work in, helping young people to look at the environmental issues that impact them locally and thinking about how they are impacted by them and what they can do to help to resolve them.
So what do you think our roles are as professionals in the water and environment sector to connect with educators?
I think it's about going into schools and building those relationships with educators. I think, as we were talking about at the session earlier today, which was just so fantastic to hear, was all about how we can create schools which are a hub for learning, but not just for the young people within them, but for everybody, a place for learning for the community as a whole, to really work as one and to collaborate and learn from each other. So making the school that hub for change makers.
Well, actually, Alan Kinder, who we heard from the Geographical Association, talked about a geography of hope. And I loved that turn of phrase. How do we help teachers teach geography in a way that is still hopeful and balances the kind of eco-anxieties that we know lots of our young people are feeling, with the possibilities that they can do something about it at local level? And actually, if everyone's doing something at local level, it really builds something really powerful, doesn't it? So I was really struck by that.
Exactly. That phrase, geographies of hope, I scribbled that down on my paper in big letters, thinking we need to come back to this because I think it's a really important issue. And I think it's about scale again as well. So when we talk about these issues, especially in the age of social media as well, we think about them at a big scale, at a global scale, which can often lead to a feeling of helplessness among young people, which feeds into that eco-anxiety, which we're hearing more and more about. So I think it's about thinking at scale. And what I like to think, and what I say a lot, is about it's better for everybody to do something small than for us to all do nothing at all.
Yeah, inaction is not an option, is it?
Exactly.
I'm mid-career, you're very much early career, and I'm starting to think about what is useful for you as the kind of immediate next generation, and then actually, children that are in primary school, the kind of following generation. So if I ask you, what do you want the sector to look like in 20 years' time?
I think it comes back to diversity. We need to have a diverse range of voices. We need to have people from a diverse range of backgrounds, a diverse range of career paths and journeys, and a diverse range of skill sets, because the people that are trying to tackle these challenges need to represent and understand the communities that are facing these challenges as well.
And we talked a little bit about non-traditional routes into the sector. So we talked about apprenticeships, for example, and SIWEM have got a tech SIWEM grade for exactly that route in. Where do you think there are options to increase the diversity of skills and backgrounds in the sector? How do we do that? How do we crack that nut?
I think it's really tricky, and I think it was interesting to hear today as well from Matthew Jack, the Junior SIWEM President, about his experience going into an apprenticeship. It's not something that I did, and I think that was partly because I didn't know fully at the time the opportunities for apprenticeships that were out there. I went through what might be considered the kind of traditional route of doing GCSEs, A-levels, university into a graduate position. Learning on the job is a fantastic way to learn. It needs to be that all options are more widely spoken about in schools, which I think we are getting more and more now, and I'm really pleased that it's more than that than when perhaps I was in school, and we're learning more about those so they're able to make those decisions of what's right for them.
That's a lovely summary point to leave us on, I think, really. There's definitely something about it. We can talk about a more inclusive and diverse sector, but we've got to think about what the action is to make some of that happen, and how do we show those routes to get into the sector to the people that really need them. So, yeah, perfect. Time has flown by. Here we are at the end of another episode of Planet Possible. I hope it's given you something to think about in your world. You can subscribe to the pod on your usual podcast player to never miss an episode, and we'd love to hear your ratings and reviews too. I'm looking forward to sharing the rest of the season with you, but all that leaves me to say now is a huge thanks to our guest today, Professor Nicholas Howden, and my excellent co-host, Megan Barnes. Thank you, Megan.
Thank you very much.
It was lovely to have you with us. That's it for now, everyone. Stay safe, and we'll see you next time.
Planet Possible is produced by Bwlb. Bwlb Bwlb. The best ideas, the strongest content.